Math 3, Unit 1, Section 3. Today we're going to be working on writing equations. So, starting here with, we have a line, linear equation. Okay, so remember when we were writing our lines, our parent graph was y equals m, and we had x plus 0 plus 0. Do you guys remember that back from Section 1? And this 0, 0 came from there being a point at 0, 0 that we use as like our starting point. Now, for today, we have 2 points that are marked on these graphs for us, which is really nice. One of the points we're going to use as our starting point, and then the other point we're going to use to find our slope. Okay? So for this problem, I'm going to highlight this one because this is going to be my starting point. I'm going to use this equation, and we're going to plug in these values for x and y into our equation. So, y equals m, and then we have x, and since my x value is minus 3, what do you think would go in the parentheses with the x? So, going back, whenever was in the parentheses, we always set that equal to 0, and then what happens to it? It becomes the opposite, right? You add or subtract it to solve. And so in order for this to end up being negative 3, inside the parentheses, it would need to be what? Positive 3. Okay, and then at the end, we would just put minus 2. So these values make our starting point. So if you kind of work backwards, if I were to set this equal to 0, I would get negative 3 for the x and then negative 2 for the y. Any questions there? All right, so now we want to find our slope in order to have the line of the equation. So you can't use that same point because if I use that same point, it'll end up making a 0. Okay? So we use our other point or another point on the line, and we're going to use those values and plug in and solve for m. So I'm going to write this as 2 equals m parenthesis 1 plus 3 minus 2. So all I did was take the 1 and plug it in for x and take the 2 and plug it in for y. Are we confused? Everybody's good? Negative? Negative. This 2 right here? Okay, so when we plug in these values, we don't have to worry about, we plug in exactly what they are into this equation and simplify. It's only here when we're writing it originally that we have to do the opposite. Are we okay now? All right. So 1 plus 3 is 4. We get 2 equals 4m minus 2. To solve, we would add 2 to both sides. Okay? We're trying to get the m by itself. We get 4 equals 4m. And then my last step would be to do what? Good. Divide both sides by 4. And we get m equals 1. So now we just take this information to plug it back into our equation because that was the one piece of information that was still missing. And so my equation, yes?
When you added the 2 so it's supposed to
Okay, so no. So whatever you do to one side when you're balancing the equation, you do the same thing to both sides. So in order, because this is a minus 2, in order to make it 0 to cancel it out, you would add 2. Yeah, so you always do whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So it's the opposite here, but then you're doing the same thing to both sides. Okay? All right, any other questions right now? All right, so my equation is going to be y equals, you can write the 1 in front, but you don't have to. I'm going to write it for right now. Y equals x plus 3 minus 2. And so that would be my equation. You could also simplify this. And how could I simplify this?
Y equals x minus 3 minus 3.
Okay, yes, or we could distribute that 1 through, and we could go y equals 1x plus 3 minus 2, which would actually give us y equals x plus 1. So this equation and this equation are both the same. They're just in different forms. This one is just simplified. For your homework, though, just leave it like this. That's totally fine. Okay? Did I confuse anybody? Do you think you're ready to do one on your own in your groups? Okay, I want you guys to try this one on your own. Let's make this point right here our starting point. And then you'll use the other point to find your slope. And I'm going to walk around, and if you have questions, I'll help you. If you get the line, I will check it. Okay. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay. All right. The equation you should have got was y equals negative 7/5 quantity or parentheses x plus 2 and then plus 5. How many got it? Outstanding. Okay. I'm going to go through it kind of quicker, but if I'm going too quick, just ask me to slow down. Okay? So you should have started by plugging in this x and y value. So y equals m. And in parentheses, it should be x plus 2, because when you set that equal to 0, that's how we get the negative 2. Plus 5. Any questions at that point? Okay, to find the slope, we plug in this for x and y. And I'm taking these x and y values and plugging them into x and y in this equation to solve for m. I have -2 equals m parentheses 3 plus 2 plus 5. We simplify to solve for m, and we know that 3 plus 2 is actually 5. So I have -2 equals 5m plus 5. In order to solve for m, I would subtract 5 to both sides. I get -7 equals 5m. Next, I will do what? Good. Divide both sides by 5. And that gives me m equals -7 over 5. So now that I have this information, I plug this back into my equation because that was the piece I was missing. And so my equation now is y equals -7 over 5 parentheses x plus 2 plus 5. And that is my equation for my line. Are there any questions? Okay, as I was walking around, I was asked, could this have been my starting point, 3, -2? And the answer is yes, okay? So I could have put 3, -2 in here and simplified. You would still end up getting the same m value, okay? But then when I wrote this here, you would have these different values, but when you simplify, you'll end up with the same equation, okay? Do we have any questions? All right, let's move on to our quadratic. So remember our quadratic, if we go back to our parent graph, it was y equals a, and then I'm going to put it like this, x plus 0 squared plus 0. This 0 and 0 comes from if your vertex was at 0, 0. Okay? Now this vertex is not at 0, 0. It is at 4, -3. So we are going to take this information and plug it into our quadratic equation, or here, with these values. So I would write this as y equals a parenthesis, and it's going to be x what? -4. Very good, because whatever is in parentheses, when you take it out, it becomes the opposite. So that means if I'm putting it in, it also needs to be the opposite. And then what would go at the end? -3. So the only thing I'm missing here is which value? The a. And in order to find the a value, what do I need to do? Very good. Plug in that other point. So we use the x and y value of the other point and plug it in here and solve for y. So how am I going to write it here? Good. -1 equals a parenthesis. Good. 6 minus 4 squared -3. So all I did was I took this equation that I wrote, but I plugged in these x and y values in for x and y in this equation. So now my only variable is that a value. And we will simplify. What is 6 minus 4? 2. So I have -1 equals, and 2 squared is what? 4. So we have 4a -3. Does anybody want to ask me a question? Yeah. This 4 right here? This one? So this was, so we had this 4, right? Which came from, that's how I got that there. And then this 6 came here. Are we okay? Do you see it now? So 6 minus 4 is 2, but then this is 2 squared. Is that what you're talking about? So 2 squared, 2 times 2 makes 4, and so this right here basically ended up simplifying to be my 4a. Anybody else have questions? Okay, so now we're just going to solve We want to get a by itself. We add 3 to both sides. Those eliminate. Negative 1 plus 3 makes 2 equals 4a, and then we divide by 4 to both sides, and I get a equals what? 1/2. So now that I have that information, we take that and plug it back into that original equation for a. Yes? So what is it going to be? Perfect. That's it. Okay, do you want to ask me questions? All right, you guys try this next one on your own. What do you think? Nope. Yeah, so the only one where you actually have a choice is the line. The rest of them have like a vertex, and so you have to use the vertex. That will always be your starting point as your vertex. Okay? Good question. Okay, anybody have questions or want some help? So that's the only one where this one is yep. And that one doesn't have a vertex. Oh, that's not all right. Was I right? That's right. Yeah, good job. Okay, everything did right. Yeah, I messed up down there. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, here we go. And normally I want you guys to come up and do these problems, but for time's sake, I'm just gonna go. Are we good? Okay, so your equation should have been y equals negative 4/9 parentheses x plus 1 squared plus 3. How many of you got it? Outstanding. Okay, and some of you I know are just still working. Here I go. If you need me to slow down, let me know. So we have our vertex there. Know that vertexes are the points where it changes from going like increasing to decreasing. Okay, so it's that point of change right there. We get y equals a parenthesis, and inside my parenthesis is going to be x what? plus 1 squared. So always when I'm plugging this value in, when I'm writing my equation, that's the opposite, plus 3. Next, we're going to plug in a different point on the graph in order to solve for a. When you're plugging in these values, they don't change. They stay x, whatever the x value, and also whatever the y value is. So that will be -1 equals a, parentheses, -4. I don't change this x value. I only change it when I'm writing my equation. So we have -4 plus 1 squared plus 3. We're going to solve for a. -4 plus 1 is -3. Be careful. I noticed that some of you forgot to square this. Okay, so when I'm writing this, what is -3 squared? So -1 equals 9a plus 3. To solve for a now, I would subtract 3 to both sides. -4 equals 9a. Divide by 9 to both sides, and a equals -4/9. So now that I have this information, I just plug it in for a into my equation that I'm writing. And we end up getting y equals -4/9 x plus 1 squared plus 3. Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to move on to linear absolute value. So same thing, we're going to start with our vertex. Okay, our equation for linear absolute value for our parent graph was y equals a absolute value of x plus 0 plus 0. Or this could also be written as m. You could use a or m there. Okay, but we're going to solve for that. We have to use the vertex value when we're writing this equation. And so when I write it here, we get y equals a absolute value. What will go inside the absolute value? Good, x minus 4. So it's just like our other equations, whatever's in parentheses. So think of your absolute value like parentheses and then plus 2 at the end. Okay, what will I do now to find a? Good, plug in that second point for x and y. Both of those are 5 this time. We write this as 5 equals a absolute value of 5 minus 4 plus 2. Remember that absolute values are like parentheses, so you have to simplify in there before you take the absolute value. What is 5 minus 4? 1. Okay, so then you would take the absolute value of 1, which makes what? 1a. Okay, and you can write 1a or we can just write a plus 2. And then what would I do next there? Subtract 2 to both sides. And then 3 equals a. So now that I have that information, I'll plug it back into my original equation. And so my equation is what? Perfect. Y equals 3, absolute value of x minus 4 plus 2. Do we have questions? Do you guys feel like we need this other example? No? Is everybody okay? All right, let's move to the exponential one. Okay, so exponential functions are slightly different when we're setting them up. Okay? Your starting point is always that point that is near the asymptote. Okay? So there is my starting point. This, our original equation, or our parent graph, is y equals b to the x plus 0 plus 0. And then we have to put our translations in there. Okay, so what do I mean by that? It's not the 3, 2. So that's where this one is slightly different than the other equations. Where do we always start with on our exponential graphs? 0, 1. So a point, kind of an X there, I'm going to put at 0, 1. So what do I do in order to get from 0, 1 to 3, 2? How does it translate? Up 3. So it went from 0 to 3. And then in order to get from 1 to 2, it goes right 1. Okay, so again, from 0, 1, and it would be easier, and on your homework, it'll be like an actual grid, so it'll be much easier to count. Okay, did I do something wrong?
You just
The X is over to the right, and then the Y goes up and to
You guys are so good. Right 3, up 1. Perfect. Both of you get candy. Okay, so do we all agree with that? Does that make more sense? So remember that the 0 and the 3, those are dealing with your X. So from 0 here to 3, we had to go right 3. And then on the Y's, from 1 to 2, it went up 1. So remember that these go X and then Y, and the X is with your right and left, and the Y is with your up and down. Okay? We'll practice again on the next one. Okay, so with that information, what's going to happen with our equation? It's going to be Y equals B to the what? In order to make it right 3, we're going to put X what? Very good. And then in order to go up 1, we're going to do? Good job. What do you think I'm going to do now? Very good. We're going to plug in 5 and 26. And so we end up with 26 equals B to the 5 minus 3 plus 1. What will we do next? Good. 5 minus 3 is what? So B, 26 equals B to the second plus 1. What's next? Good. Subtract 1. 25 equals B to the second. Can I change 25 to have a second power? Or you can take the square root. Good. Either way. 25 is 5 squared. Notice that the exponents match, so that means the bases match, so that means B equals what? And we take this and plug it into our equation here. And so my equation ends up being what? Good job. Y equals 5 to the X minus 3 plus 1.
To the attendance office. Cole Acevedo, please report to the attendance office.
Okay, so I feel like we for sure need another exponential one. Do you guys agree? Okay, let's try this together still. Okay, so here we are at -2, -1, the one that's closest to that asymptote. We know that we normally start at 0, 1. So let's talk about right and left first. If we're at 0 and we need to get to the X value, so we're at the X value of 0, we want to get to the X value of -2, what are we doing? How are we translating? Left 2. Because we're starting at 0 and we're going left to get to -2. If we are at 1 on the Y and we want to get to -1 on the Y, what are we doing? Down 2. Okay, in your groups, discuss this really quick. Work through this. Figure out how we came up with left 2, down 2. See if you can explain that to each other. I'm listening to some of you, I feel like there's still a little confusion. And so I'm just going to kind of draw it out here. This point right here is at -2, -1. So I'm going to left 2, down 1, and that's that point. But my original is at 0, 1. If you're looking at a coordinate plane, it's easier, I think, to see than right here where everything doesn't quite match. And so we're trying to figure out what is the translation from that 0, 1 point, that starting point, to this point right here. And so from here, it's going left 1, 2, and it's going down 1, 2. So that's how I got the left 2, down 2. Is that better? Awesome. Okay. Y equals B to the what? X plus 2. Where did that plus 2 come from? Tell in your groups right there. How did I get that plus 2? Can somebody say it really loud? What happened for me?
Down 2, so it's plus 2.
Opposite in terms, it's left 2. Because it's left 2, we do the opposite. Because remember, X is on going left and right. So that's why this is actually left 2 means a -2, which here it's like the parentheses, we make it a plus 2. Are we okay? All right, and then what would be this value right here at the end? -2. Because down 2 really means -2 on the Y. Okay, we plug in our other point, and our other point is -1, 3. So we have our X and Y value. We get 3 equals B to the -1 plus 2 minus 2. Yes? Okay. -1 plus 2 is what? 1. I know, it was like a trick question, huh? Okay, so we have B to the first, or we could just write it as B. And then we have -2. And what do I do to finish solving that? Add 2 to both sides. And so we get 5 equals B. I don't have to write a 1 exponent, correct? So there's nothing more to do there except for to write our final equation. And so my equation for this problem will be Y equals 5 to the X plus 2 minus 2. Do we have any questions?